Vasco da Gama is a figure that hardly needs any introduction. The first known European to successfully navigate the Cape of Good Hope, and thus the first European to successfully reach India by sea, he established a direct maritime link between Europe and Asia. Who might need more of an introduction is his son Cristóvão da Gama, another navigator who fought the Ottomans and was governor of both the Portuguese Gold Coast and then Portuguese India. Still yet even more lesser well known is Vasco da Gama's other son, Cristóvão da Gama, a young military commander who, in aid to the Ethiopian Empire, waged a kind of defensive crusade against the Adal Sultanate in the region. This is his story as well as the story of the Ethiopian Crusade. Cristóvão, fourth son of Vasco da Gama, first left for India in the company of his brother Cristóvão in 1532 to serve in Malacca. He sailed a second time to India in the company of Garcia de Noronha, then third viceroy of Portuguese India, in 1538. It was in 1541 that he accompanied his brother Cristóvão in an expedition against the Ottomans in the Red Sea. The brothers eventually faced a crushing defeat at the hands of the Ottomans. After this defeat, the brothers regrouped at the port city of Massawa, which is in modern-day Eritrea. Here would be a good place to make mention of the historical context in which the Ethiopian Empire found itself at the time. In the 1490s, the Muslim Adal Sultanate to the east, ruled by the Walaashma dynasty, began making major incursions into the Christian Ethiopian Empire's territory. This was personified by the Muslim leader at the time named Mahfouz, who adopted the title of Imam, effectively committing himself to a jihad against the empire. It is said he made no less than 25 annual raids into the regions of Shawa, Amhara, Fatagar, during which large numbers of cattle and slaves were seized. Mahfouz's depredations were eventually brought to an end in 1517 when the Emperor Lebna-Dengel, also known as Dawit II or David II, pursued him to his camp, whereat the Imam challenged any Christian to a duel to the death. It is reported a monk named Gebra Andreas accepted the challenge and finally slew Mahfouz. Threats from the Adal Sultanate would thus be kept in check for the time being. Given that around this time the Portuguese began to entrench themselves in the Red Sea region to challenge Ottoman aspirations there, and given the looming threat posed by Adal, the Ethiopian Empire sought an alliance with Christian Portugal. This was largely the brainchild of then-regent Empress Eleni, widow of Emperor Zari Yacob, as Emperor Lebna-Dengel was too young at this time. The Empress sent an Armenian named Matthew as ambassador to Portugal to seek an alliance. The King of Portugal would send an embassy which landed at Massawa in 1520. Lebna-Dengel did not conclude any agreement with the Portuguese during their 6-year embassy in the country. However, there was at least a scholarly impact to the mission, in that its chaplain, Catholic priest Father Francisco Alvarez, wrote Verdadera información das terras do Presteium das Indias, perhaps the first detailed description of the country. In Harar, then capital of Adal, a new Muslim leader would arise. Enter Ahmad ibn Ibrahim al-Ghazi, referred to by the Ethiopians as Grain, meaning left-handed, one of the most formidable characters to ever threaten the Ethiopian nation. According to the Encyclopedia Aethiopica, Grain was of Somali origin. Like Mahfouz before him, Grain assumed the title Imam, thus giving a religious bent to his military exploits. Before gaining supreme power in Harar, Grain had already made various successful incursions into Ethiopian territory. Not only this, but he consolidated power around him by recruiting various Afar and Somali tribal groups, chiefs, and even arranged marriages of his sisters. Refusing to recognize the authority of the emperor and pay taxes, Grain effectively declared jihad against Ethiopia and made further incursions into the provinces of Fatagar, Ifat, and Dawaro. Then, in March 23rd of 1529, Grain and Emperor Lebna-Dengel would confront each other at the famous Battle of Shimbra Kure. According to the Arab Hariri writer Arab Faqih, in his work Futuh al-Habesha, a first-hand account of the jihad against Ethiopia, The Adalites were vastly outnumbered. Nonetheless, the huge army of Lebna faced an absolutely crushing defeat. See, Grain had another advantage, and that was that he had, according to historian Richard Pankhurst, secured a large number of matchlockmen, i.e. firearms, from the Ottomans. If true, this battle would mark the first time Ethiopians would face an enemy equipped with firearms on any relevant scale. However, historian Merid Aregay does not believe the Adalites received any significant number of matchlocks prior to at least 1539. At any rate, the defeat marks Grain's official and definitive entry into the conquest of almost all of Ethiopia. In a few years, Grain's forces swept throughout Ethiopia, subjecting large parts of Gojam in the west, Nuba in the northwest, and Tigray in the north to fire and the sword. Grain sought not only to permanently occupy the territory he conquered, but also to force the inhabitants to convert to Islam. In aid to this policy, Grain destroyed countless churches, monasteries, manuscripts, and other religious cultural treasures. In a quite paradoxical display, Arab Faqih records Grain as being stunned by the beauty of the churches. Quote, "The Imam asked all the Arabs who were with him, 'Is there the like of this church with its images and its gold in Byzantium or in India or in any other place?' They replied, 'We never saw or heard of its like in Byzantium or India or anywhere in the world.'" End quote. Taken from Futuh Habesha, The Conquest of Abyssinia, 16th century, translated by Paul Lester Stenhouse, annotations by Richard Pankhurst. Despite the Imam finding these churches to be beautiful, objectively speaking, they were desecrated and burned nonetheless. At the Battle of Antukia in February 1531, the emperor's much larger army was once again routed. This was followed in April through May with the capture of Barara, which was then the capital of the emperor. Simultaneously, the province of Shoa effectively fell in 1531, and both Amhara and Lasta in the north were conquered in 1533. The southern regions of Gurage, Bade, Hadia, Sidama, and the area surrounding Zawai Lake were all subjugated in 1532. The emperor during this time was virtually on the constant run from place to place, and in fact narrowly escaped capture at the Battle of Wasil in Amhara on the 27th of October 1531. Emperor Lebna would continue to elude capture until finally reaching the isolated mountaintop monastery of Deborodamo, where he would die on the 2nd of September 1540. Of his 4 sons, Victor was killed by the Muslims in 1539, while another son, Minas, was captured and taken as prisoner. Grain failed to capture the famous royal prison atop Ambagishan in 1531. Nonetheless, everywhere his soldiers continued pulling down churches and monasteries, pillaging and destroying countless treasures. After the sieges of Wasil and Ambagishan in 1533, the invading Adalites proceeded to conquer Tigray, one of the principal provinces of the empire. Marching into the ancient holy city of Aksum, the seat of Ethiopian Christianity since the 4th century AD, they massacred some 10,000 people, even destroying the famous church of Our Lady Mary of Zion, which, according to tradition, houses the Ark of the Covenant. This is the Ethiopia that Cristóvão de Gama entered when he landed with his brother at Massawa in 1541, an empire which had virtually all but been completely conquered and on the verge of being relegated to the dustbin of history. It was during this initial landing that de Gama's group was approached by Yishak, then Bahar Negus. The Bahar Negus was a type of regional king over the coastal and island regions of the empire. With him were letters from the Empress Zablawengel, mother of Emperor Galaudeus, who was now ruling after the death of his father, Lebna Dengel, in which they were begged to come to the aid of the empire. On hearing of the travesties which Grain had inflicted on the lands, they took counsel and agreed to help. Cristóvão was entrusted with heading the operation and was given 400 men, more than 1,000 muskets and arquebuses, and 8 artillery pieces. It is said that the governor Dam Estevam offered 1,000 men. However, Yishak declined, as he didn't think the land could sustain them all, given how devastated it had been made. On the 9th of July, Dam Cristóvão left Massawa with his men, taking as well Dam Yom Bermudez, then Latin Catholic Patriarch of Ethiopia, as well as another priest. Accompanied by the Bahar Negus, they marched for 6 days inland and rested for 2, until they reached the town of Debarwa, residence of the Bahar Negus. The natives, many of whom had been in hiding, received Dam Cristóvão with much fanfare, the monks bringing their crosses, greeting him in procession. He reassured them all that he had come to the land to rid it of the Muslim Adalites. The following day, Cristóvão sent men on his behalf to bring back the empress, who at the time was atop the famous Debredamo. This mountain, with its sheering cliffs, cannot be reached but by ropes and pulleys. After bringing up the 2 captains dispatched for the job, she greeted them with much tears, and the following day they descended the mountain to meet Dam Cristóvão. Upon reaching his camp, she was saluted twice with all their artillery and firearms. Upon meeting da Gama, he reassured her that he had come by the governor's orders to serve her, and that he was sure they were all ready to die for the holy faith of Christ in the defense of the empire. The empress thanked him profusely and declared that God would reward the king of Portugal and governor for all they were about to do. 2 days later, Cristóvão sent news of his arrival to Emperor Galaudeus, who had been in hiding in the mountain strongholds. Then he began at once to construct war engines and gun carriages. At the time, Gran had constantly sent out spies to find out how many Portuguese there were, what weapons they have, etc. Upon discovering 2 spies in their own ranks, dressed as Ethiopians, da Gama had them torn asunder on the very same gun carriages they had made. At the end of winter, letters arrived from the emperor in which he congratulated Dam Cristóvão and the Portuguese on their arrival, and implored them to come to him at once, and he would also come to meet up with them. So, with the empress and 200 additional Ethiopians, they left Debarwa on 5th of December. Dam Cristóvão with 250 Portuguese at the front, then the baggage train guarded by 2 captains, then further back the empress, her ladies and maidens, and 50 Portuguese with some Ethiopians. Men were sent out in front to scout for any spies, and Dam Cristóvão would personally ride up and down the company twice a day to make sure nothing was amiss. Wherever they passed, the Adalites set up to collect taxes would flee, and the native inhabitants would come out to greet the Portuguese and subject themselves to the empress. In February 1542, they reached Abyssinia. This was another very strong mountain which Gran had took and posted 1,500 soldiers atop. Given that, if they continued past the mountain, the Adalites might come down and retake all the land they had just pacified and cut off all their supplies, Cristóvão decided to attack it. The empress, fearing defeat, objected at first. However, after Cristóvão made his case, she acquiesced. There were 3 entrances to the mountain, however, all were very arduous, and each of them guarded by a captain and some 500 Muslims armed with bows, arrows, spears, and shields. He entrusted the first entrance to Captains Francisco Velho and Manuel de Cunha with their men and gave them 3 artillery pieces. He gave the second entrance to Yom de Fonesa and Francisco de Abreu with their men and 3 artillery pieces. The third entrance, being the most dangerous as it is sheer rock, he took for himself, along with the rest of the Portuguese, apart from 50, who would stay back and protect the empress. The initial stage of the battle would be simple. They should make it seem they want to get into the entrances, but not get too close, and when he withdrew, they should all do likewise. So they started the approach that afternoon. The amount of arrows and stones hurled down by the Muslims was innumerable. Not only this, but they pushed down large boulders, which made enough noise to scare any normal person. After a while, after seeing what he wanted to, da Gama and his men withdrew. On seeing this, the Muslims thought themselves victorious, and thus feeling safe, they celebrated a great tumult throughout the night. Not only them, but the empress from a distance seeing all this was quite sad, imagining the Portuguese did not have the heart for the task. Dom Cristóvão sent her word explaining why they did what they did and promised her in the morning she would see what his men were capable of. At dawn the following day, a priest took a crucifix, and da Gama and the rest of the Portuguese kneeled before it and earnestly asked God to give them the strength and courage against his enemies, and offered their souls for the defense of his holy faith. Patriarch Bermudez, who was present then, gave them his apostolic blessing. They then took their positions as the previous day, and when da Gama gave the signal, they all attacked with great spirit and fired their artillery and guns, which struck fear into the Muslims. They began casting down boulders as they had done the previous day, killing 2 Portuguese before they reached the rock. Dom Cristóvão, seeing this, increased the attack even more. They planted their lances into the rock and began to climb Abyssinia. They continued to climb despite tumbling twice, with Cristóvão at the lead, and were soon confronted by the Muslims. As it was now hand to hand, the Muslims could not handle the assault, and the 500 fled, continuously being attacked by da Gama. By this time, Francisco Velho and Manuel de Cunha had also fought their way through their entrances, although with difficulty, with many soldiers being wounded and 2 killed. The Muslims, although retreated, did not close the upper door as they expected the Portuguese to stop where they were. However, the Portuguese assault did not let up, hacking and slashing into the melee. The Muslim captain fought with much valor, thrusting his lance into the chest of a Portuguese, going straight through, despite the chainmail, and smashing another's helmet with his saber, knocking him to the ground stunned. Nonetheless, another Portuguese came and slew the Adalite captain, forcing the rest to retreat. All while these events were transpiring, João de Fonseca and Francisco de Abreu also got through their entrance, although at the loss of 3 men, but once they got through, the Muslims retreated from there as well. As the Muslims all retreated to the top and attempted to hold out, the Portuguese met them, arriving from the 3 different directions, and slew them all, not leaving a single one of them living. Others threw themselves off the peaks, thinking they would be saved that way, only to be dashed to pieces. They found a large amount of Christian women captives, Muslim women, and booty such as 9 horses and 10 mules. Up till this point, the Portuguese had no horses, only mules. When all of them had made it up the mountain, they determined they had lost 8 men, and more than 30 were wounded. Dom Cristóvão tended to the wounded and had the mosque cleared out and blessed by Patriarch Bermudez, so that the dead might be buried therein. Da Gama gave word to the Empress of the great victory the Lord had deigned to give him, and invited her to come and see her mountain. As can be imagined, the Empress was exuberant and surprised so many Adalites had been killed in such a short time. She gave him thanks, however, declined to go and see for herself, as not only is the climb too arduous, but she was informed that it was covered with dead Muslims, a sight of which she would surely find disagreeable. After hearing this, da Gama had the Patriarch bless the mosque, which he did solemnly, and renamed it Our Lady of Victory, after which they buried the 8 Portuguese. Next morning, the Patriarch celebrated a holy mass, and everyone gave thanks to God for granting them the victory. Cristóvão stationed the wounded there, since they could not descend the mountain, and he went with the rest to the Empress, who received him with much benevolence. She, in turn, handed the mountain to a captain of hers whose forefathers had been lords of it. They stayed for the rest of February in that region. As word of this victory spread, not only the locals, but even those from far away flocked to bring them provisions and other necessaries. It was around this time they were met by 2 Portuguese who came by sea, sent by the governor, to inquire on the progress of da Gama's mission. Joyful at this encounter, da Gama sent some men to Massawa, bringing letters for the governor to inform him all that had transpired, and to bring back some additional gunpowder, cannonballs, and other necessities. After Da Gama and the Empress had left Ambasanite towards a land they were called to by a Christian captain in the Ethiopian Empire, a messenger reached them with letters from Emperor Glaudewos telling them to make haste in the journey because Grein was looking for them, and it would be dangerous for them had they not reached each other beforehand. Upon reaching the land, the captain received them and gave Da Gama 8 horses and warned him to equip himself well, for his spies had informed him Grein was not far out. Sending out additional spies to find out precisely where he was coming from and with how many men, Cristóvão continued the march. If Grein was as close as thought, there'd be no time for the men sent to the coast to return, nor enough time to join forces with the emperor. 2 days later, the spies returned. Grein was less than a day's journey out and had countless men with him. Da Gama told his men there was no choice but to fight, as if they withdrew the way they came, no people would give them any supplies, knowing Grein was on their tail. He told them victory was in the hands of the Lord, and if it were not his will to grant it to them, then they would die fighting for his holy faith. The following day was Palm Sunday, and marching across the flat plain, 2 scouts sent out to sea came back saying Grein was a league away. Dom Cristóvão told his army to pitch camp on a small hill in the midst of the plain. The Empress was placed in a safe place, and they kept watch all night. Sunday morning, 5 Muslims appeared on horseback in the distance on a hill to spy out the land. Then, upon seeing Dom Cristóvão's camp, then hastily turned back. Cristóvão, in turn, sent 2 scouts to the same hill, who returned, saying Grein's men filled that entire plain and were setting camp to the hillock. While doing so, Grein came up the hill with 300 horsemen and 3 large Adalite standards to watch Dom Cristóvão's camp for a while. Grein then sent his men into march and surrounded the camp, and when they had done so, they kept watch all night with fires and loud shouting. The Portuguese in turn periodically fired off mortars so as to deter the enemy from coming any closer. The following morning, Grein sent an ambassador to Da Gama who conveyed his surprise that Da Gama had come to face him with such a small army, and also confirmed that he appeared as youthful as he had been told, as well as naive and inexperienced. He chalked Da Gama's supposed dilemma up to the people, such as the Empress bringing him into the land under false pretenses, and offered to spare him on the condition he come over with all the Portuguese and join forces with him. If he did not wish to do so, then he bid him to leave and return to his land. With the ambassador was sent him a gift, a monk's hood and rosary. In doing this, Grein meant to show that he did not consider Cristóvão as a captain, but rather a monk, as was their custom to consider all the Portuguese in those lands. After hearing the embassy, Cristóvão treated the ambassador with honor, giving him a purple satin robe, scarlet cap with his expensive medal, and told him he would be sending a reply for his lord soon, and had him accompanied out of the camp. Cristóvão had a reply written up in Arabic to be sent with a fair-skinned slave of the Portuguese. They dressed him up very well for the occasion. The letter, in essence, said that he had been sent by the great lion of the sea and mighty lord of the land, whose custom it was to come to the aid of those who can do little, and having received news that the Christian emperor of Ethiopia was dispossessed of his kingdoms by infidel enemies of the Catholic faith, he was sending the assistance that he could, which, although small, was a match for all his multitude. For they were so evil, and had taken that land without any right or justice, not by their own strength, but because the true God had permitted it to be so, in order to punish the Ethiopians for their sins. But he trusted in his divine mercy, and that his wrath would be appeased by what they had already suffered, and that he would return them to their former freedom and possession of their lands by means of the Portuguese. And even though there were few of them, he would see on another day how they fought, and how much they were worth, because they had not come in order to turn back, but to seek him out. With this letter, Cristóvão sent a large mirror, and some small tweezers women use for their eyebrows. In doing so, Cristóvão meant to show that he did not consider Grind to be a man, but rather he considered him to be a woman. After receiving this reply, Grind fell in a rage, and with that the slave returned. Grind aimed to starve out the Portuguese by surrounding them and blocking supplies using his large force of 15,000 foot soldiers, 1,500 cavalry, and 200 Turkish gunners. With only 350 Portuguese left, Dom Cristóvão sent a small force to dislodge the Turks who had advanced dangerously close. A fierce battle ensued, with Portuguese artillery helping repel the attackers. Seeing they were being slowly worn down, Dom Cristóvão decided to break the siege and march out on April 4th, 1542. As they moved, the Muslims attacked with loud fanfare, but the Portuguese responded with heavy fire. The Turks pressed hard, and when Grind joined with 500 more cavalry, the Portuguese were thrown into serious danger. Realizing they planned to starve him out, Dom Cristóvão decided to fight. At dawn on April 4th, 1542, he organized his troops for a breakout, placing the Empress in the center and taking the rear. As they marched, the Muslims attacked with great noise, thinking victory was near. The Portuguese fired back with guns and artillery, pushing back enemy foot soldiers. The Turks advanced fiercely, joined by Grind and 500 cavalry, putting the Portuguese in serious trouble. Dom Cristóvão ordered his men to rely on artillery, which held off the cavalry. But as the Turks pressed closer, he sent Manuel de Cunha with 50 men to counterattack. They fought fiercely, but the Turks captured their standard, killed several Portuguese, and wounded Cunha, forcing a retreat. Dom Cristóvão, who by this point had been shot in the leg, continued to lead and encourage his men nonetheless with great bravery. During the intense battle, Grind was also shot in the leg, the shot going through his leg and piercing and killing his horse. Grind was carried off the field, prompting the Muslims to retreat. Seeing this, Dom Cristóvão launched a final charge with his troops and 200 Ethiopians, forcing the enemy to flee, leaving the field full of Muslim dead. Fearing a counterattack due to his men's exhaustion and lack of horses, he ordered a retreat. Back at camp, the Empress and her women tended the wounded. Dom Cristóvão buried the dead, treated his soldiers himself since the surgeon was injured, and only then treated his own wound. That night he secretly sent word to the Portuguese in Massawa, urging them to return quickly. As reinforcements delayed and the enemy regrouped, Dom Cristóvão resolved to launch another attack, placing his trust in God to grant them victory once again. 12 days after defeating Grind, with the wounded ready to fight again, Dom Cristóvão and his men confessed their sins and marched out at dawn on Low Sunday. The Muslims, now reinforced and led by the boastful captain Garad Amar, with 500 cavalry and 3,000 infantry, charged confidently. Garad led a bold attack, but only a few followed him closely due to fear of Portuguese artillery, which caused heavy losses. Grind, carried on a litter due to his injury, ordered a full assault. A fierce battle followed. 8 Portuguese horsemen stood out, repeatedly breaking through enemy lines and killing many, though their small number limited pursuit. The foot soldiers also fought bravely, launching attacks and leaving the battlefield covered with fallen Adalites and Turks. During the battle, an explosion accidentally ignited Portuguese gunpowder, killing 2 and burning several others. Though it seemed like a disaster initially, it caused the Muslim horses to panic and bolt, disrupting their attack. This unexpected chaos gave the Portuguese an opening to press the Turks, who eventually began to retreat. Seeing the enemy weaken, Dom Cristóvão launched a full assault, forcing the Muslims to flee in disorder. The Portuguese chased them fiercely, but had to stop from exhaustion, even though Grind was still visible being carried away. At the abandoned Adalite camp, they found tents and supplies, and after gathering the spoils, discovered 14 of their own to be dead, and buried them solemnly, giving thanks for the victory. Because the area was ruined and full of wounded, they moved to a better spot near a nearby stream, only to find Grein resting there. Shocked, he fled with his men, who ran for 8 days through harsh terrain, suffering heavy losses from hunger, wounds, and lack of shelter, until they reached yet another impregnable mountain. Dom Cristóvão stayed by the stream to rest and care for the wounded, knowing he couldn't continue the pursuit immediately. 2 days later, reinforcements arrived from Massawa with 30 cavalry and 500 foot soldiers, but they were disappointed to have missed the battles. Once they arrived, Dom Cristóvão prepared to pursue Grein again, leaving the most severely wounded in the care of a local governor called Tigre Mohin, who treated them well. He marched for 10 days to reach the mountain where Grein was hiding, but with winter beginning early, the Empress advised they camp nearby at another mountain called Ofala. From there, they could block supplies and wait for the Emperor's arrival. Dom Cristóvão agreed and sent a mulatto messenger, Ares Dias, to urge Emperor Gradios to hurry. The locals, friendly to the Portuguese, quickly built wooden huts and provided ample food and supplies. While resting near Ofla, Dom Cristóvão was visited by a Jew who offered to guide him in a surprise attack on a nearby mountain, Oite, which held many horses but was lightly guarded. The Jew warned that Emperor Galaudius would soon pass through that area and might be blocked by the Muslims. Though saddened to hear the emperor had few men with him, Dom Cristóvão decided to attack. He left camp secretly at midnight with 100 Portuguese, crossing the fast-moving Tekeze River, and climbed the mountain. Contrary to the Jews' claim, they found over 3,000 foot soldiers and 400 horsemen. Despite being outnumbered, Dom Cristóvão led a charge, personally killing the enemy captain, Cid Ahmad. The Portuguese routed the enemy, aided by local Jews, who killed fleeing Muslims. Amazed by the victory, the Jewish guide and 12 of his men converted to Christianity. Dom Cristóvão left the man as mountain captain and sent word to the emperor that the way was now safe. The Portuguese took much loot, including 300 mules, 80 prized horses, slaves, and supplies, and returned to camp. Meanwhile, Grein was gathering reinforcements. Recognizing his weakened position, he appealed to the Pasha of Zubayd in Arabia for help. The Pasha responded by sending 700 to 900 Turkish arquebusiers, cavalry, and artillery. Many Arabs and Ethiopians joined too. These reinforcements reached Grein just as Dom Cristóvão returned to camp. The next day, Grein descended from the mountain with his enlarged army, camping close enough for Turkish artillery to reach the Portuguese. Seeing Grein's large reinforcements, Dom Cristóvão met with his officers to decide what to do. They agreed retreat was impossible. Locals would turn against them, block their way, and Grein would attack. They resolved to hold their fortified camp until the Portuguese, with the horses, arrived in 2 days. A messenger was sent urging them to hurry, as Grein appeared ready to attack. The men worked hard through the day and night to strengthen their defenses, despite being exhausted. But even that wasn't enough to delay battle until the reinforcements arrived. Confident in his superior numbers and firepower, Grein launched a full-scale attack at dawn on August 28, 1542, leading 900 Turks with artillery at the front. Dom Cristóvão, seeing the threat, ordered his men to hold their positions inside the camp until reinforcements with horses arrived. A fierce battle followed, with intense exchanges of artillery and gunfire. As the Turks advanced and reached the palisades, they inflicted heavy losses. To relieve pressure, Dom Cristóvão led a bold sortie with 50 men, pushing back the enemy, but returning wounded himself with a gunshot to the leg. Other officers followed his example, launching attacks that drove the Turks back, but resulted in casualties each time. By midday, The situation was dire. The wounded filled the empress's house, and even she and her maids were tending to injuries while weeping. Turkish cannon fire was hitting the house itself, wounding 2 women, and it seemed the defenses might soon fall. Despite his injuries, Dom Cristóvão moved tirelessly from station to station, encouraging his troops with remarkable bravery. As Turkish attacks intensified, he ordered Francisco de Abreu to lead a counterattack, supported by his brother Onofre. Francisco drove back the Turks, but was killed during the retreat. Onofre, while trying to recover his brother's body, was also shot and died. The 2 beloved brothers fell together in battle, honored for their sacrifice. Grief-stricken by the loss of key captains and many wounded men, Dom Cristóvão rallied the few soldiers still able to fight. He led a fierce charge that broke the enemy's advance, but lacking horses, he couldn't secure victory. During the retreat, he was shot again, this time breaking his right arm. Manuel de Cunha helped pull the men back, all of whom were exhausted and injured. Even so, Dom Cristóvão continued urging his men on. Twice they repelled the Turks, trying to enter the camp. But as the enemy surged again and night fell, some advised retreat up the mountain. Dom Cristóvão refused, prepared to fight on, sword in his left hand, but his men stopped him and forced him on a mole to escape, joined by the Patriarch and Empress. The Turks entered the camp and slaughtered over 40 wounded Portuguese. 1 injured soldier, lying near a gunpowder store, lit it to kill himself and the attackers. Others fled through the forest. The Patriarch and Empress each escaped with small groups, while Dom Cristóvão and 14 companions, wounded and exhausted, took a separate path, walking all night through difficult terrain. At dawn, Dom Cristóvão and his wounded companions hid in a forested valley to avoid capture. Lacking medicine, they used fat from his mule to treat their wounds. Soon a group of Turks and Arabs passed nearby, searching for them. An old woman, pretending to be frail, distracted the pursuers, but suddenly led them directly to the hiding spot. This caused many of the Muslims to believe that she had been sent by their prophet Muhammad. The group was captured and Dom Cristóvão was immediately recognized. Taken to Grind's camp, where the heads of 170 slain Portuguese were displayed, he was mocked, beaten, paraded around, and tortured. His beard turned into candle wicks and his eyebrows pulled out with the same tweezers he had once sent to Grind. Through it all, he remained faithful and calm, offering his suffering to God. Grind then mockingly offered to spare him if he renounced the faith and called the remaining Portuguese to surrender. Dom Cristóvão refused, boldly declaring the following as recorded in Father Páez's work: "If you more realized who the Portuguese really were, you would not say such vanities. You can do what you like with me, for I am in your power. But rest assured that even if you gave me half your lands, I would not make a single Portuguese come to you, because the Portuguese do not live with Moors, who are dirty and enemies of the holy faith of Christ my Lord." End quote. Enraged, Grind drew his saber and beheaded him. The Turks, furious at Grind for killing such a noble prisoner without consulting them, especially one they wished to send to the Grand Turk, threatened to break their alliance. They soon departed for Zebed, taking Dom Cristóvão's head and 13 prisoners, though leaving 200 Turks as ordered by the Sultan. That night, 1 Portuguese escaped and informed the Empress of Cristóvão's martyrdom. Some say that where his blood fell, a spring miraculously appeared, later revered by Ethiopian Christians who claimed its waters healed the sick. It's said, at the very moment of Dom Cristóvão's death, a large tree in a monastery courtyard mysteriously uprooted and flipped upside down despite the calm weather. The monks, amazed, recorded the date and later learned he had been killed at the exact time. Months later, on the day the Portuguese killed Grind, the tree righted itself and sprouted new leaves. When Portuguese soldiers visited, the monks confirmed the story. Older monks passed down the account, seeing it as a sign from God honoring Dom Cristóvão's martyrdom, suffered with great patience at the hands of a fierce enemy of the faith. Emperor Sultan Segud, also known as Susenyos, who converted to the Catholic faith, even called him a martyr and supported efforts to recover his remains. Though a search was organized to retrieve his bones and return them to India for proper veneration, it failed. Despite bribes and careful planning, local heathens deceived and plotted against the Portuguese, forcing them to abandon the mission empty-handed. Thanks for watching. I know that's kind of a abrupt end, kind of cliffhanger, sort of, but this will be a two-part series. I started making this video. I didn't think it'd take too long, but it took a lot longer than I was hoping. I just started this channel, and I didn't want to make long videos to begin with until later down the road, perhaps, but it's kind of impossible to tell this story without it being long and having a lot of details. So, yeah, I'm working on the second part of this video with, what happens after Da Gama's death, what happens to Grind, what happens to the Empress, what happens to Ethiopia, what happens to the rest of the Portuguese, etc. So, yeah, just thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.